Hello, hello, hello to today's podcast. So, the topic today is actually something I just came up with. And it's a two-part topic. It's going to be something about both what the true Antichrist is, as well as the benefits of COVID, funny enough, and how they relate. Not usually the topics you hear too often in podcasts, I believe, but I thought it was worthy of putting them both together. They came to me separately, but I see that there's something tied here. And what I wanted to start off with first is the words that I came up with, which is the Antichrist is the bigot within. It is the part of you that is anti that which is one with God. And it is your shadow. It is also something we see in others. We see it in the reflection of the world, both collectively and in individuals. But it's the part of us that is against what is good, what is loving, what is honest, which is that which is against others for simply being in many ways. You may say, what does this have to do with the topic of COVID? But this then brings me to the topic of COVID. And what is the benefit of COVID? What is the real metaphysical reason for COVID? And there's actual large amounts of benefits to COVID. We learn a lot about ourselves, but ultimately it was to learn about ourselves. What do we as humans collectively do when faced with God in our mortality? How did we treat each other when a large, scary, unknown thing came to us? And the way we treated each other was a exemplary way of showing us where we have to grow as humans still in this planet thousands of years later, after we had the Messiah Jesus Christ, as well as the other messiahs that have come since then. Messiah being people in union with God, but obviously Jesus Christ being Christ meaning Messiah, being a rabbi who explained through the modeling of living it how to do it, how we now live our life as awakened beings, much as Lao Tzu did, many yogis have done, and the modern awakened individual is living, who is having these conversations, who looks at the world and goes, I see the good of God in everything, and I understand that everything is for our benefit when we get away from our ego and the death of the individual, which can be challenging for some. Accepting mortality, or that we all die, is one of the very early steps of awakening or practicing being with God, and it's one of the harder ones because it has to deal with grief and loss that hasn't even happened yet, let alone what the world is like once we're gone. There's a lot of large existential questions there. But the thought came to me to discuss the Antichrist part, because we have what I call Satan worshiping in this world, which are things like the KKK, right? Satan worshippers. Ultimately, they're Satan worshippers, because you are to treat everybody as if they are Christ, or that they are to become Christ, and hold them accountable to that, no matter how bad they are. And that's easy as a parent often, or as most jobs or roles in this world. But the challenging parts are when we get to people who do evil, and what do we do with them? So what do we do with somebody who brings evil into the world, like the KKK, who does Antichrist's work? And do we label them as what they truly are? We don't, because we don't want to offend or hurt someone's feelings by saying, well, clearly the leader of the KKK is a clear Satan worshiper. He doesn't have to do rituals or say this out loud. It's his treatment of human beings that is the true Antichrist Satan worshiping behavior. And that may sound like obviousness to anybody who's ever researched the subject, and that slavery was ultimately a form of Satan worshiping that we are aware of in humanity that has happened. To treat anybody as less than Jesus Christ once Jesus Christ is born and thus one with them is to truly do evil's work on this world. And you can expound upon this dramatically, honestly. Like, there's a lot of thought around this, right? Think about the demon of ignorance, right? If you worship the demon of ignorance, you are Satan worshiping, right? I don't know everything, but I also know everything in some way, right? Not everything, but I know a lot. But I can own I don't know things. There's things I don't know. If you ever run into somebody who's unwilling to admit they don't know something, you really have to suspect who and what they are and what they're doing and why. And sometimes it's an insecurity, right? But what is that insecurity bringing into the world? Usually you find this with people who are narcissists, right? Or have other health issues. If we call that a health issue or a disorder or ultimately a worship of evil, depending on what scale we're talking about. The other part is we get into blanket statements sometimes, which makes this very difficult. So if I call a KKK worshiper a Satan worshiper, all right, that's a blanket statement. Are they all that? Yeah. I mean that's a Satan worshiping community. That's what they are. But if I said every bigot's a Satan worshiper, it becomes more of a gray area. Because some people are ignorant. They don't know better. They get raised in an environment where they don't understand what's really going on, and it's difficult for them to even conceive of a more mature adult individual who can actually recognize this. So why am I going on about this with Antichrist and COVID? Because ultimately, the way we treat each other through COVID was very anti-human. It was, take this drug that is untested by our own laws, or you won't have a job. I won't be friends with you if you question the status quo. If you don't do exactly as you're told by those people who we say are the right ones, but are honestly breaking their own laws and rules. You will not be my friend. You will not be working. You shouldn't deserve good things. You should be carted off to jail. You shouldn't be allowed into music events. That was one thing I experienced. It was the ultimate segregation again. And it's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate. Because at the end of the day, what we didn't have was basic health conversations. We didn't have conversations, right, about healthy activity, eating well, maintaining your body, health practices. Wearing a mask was fine, right? You didn't have to, but if you wore one because you wanted to protect yourself in an area or because you wanted to protect others from you, that was okay. But the thought that we could use a untested drug, which I'm not for or against that drug, but the laws of America, it takes about 9 years to have a drug go through proper FDA approval. So in America, there was no testing done of this drug, so there was no fundamental science to this. The science is now the people who didn't take it versus the ones who did, being the control, obviously, who didn't, and the ones who did as being the test subjects. The reality is it's hopefully benign. Long term, we don't know. We're not at 9 years of testing yet. We also don't know the ramifications of taking a drug based on fear when we know the placebo effect is real. Something very obvious. Nobody should have taken that out of fear. They should have done it out of love and kindness for themselves and others, which is totally acceptable. The thought that you could lose your job over this, though, was insane. Now, the reality is death is kind of ever present. A lot of people had to deal with their mortality with this. And it's the bigger picture there of looking at your mortality that people don't seem to want to still look at and go, were we really at that big of a risk? And even if we weren't, there was deaths. I think 1.2 million, I believe, was the last count I looked at, which is a large number out of a 330 million cohort-sized nation. And we're one of the largest amounts of death. America had more deaths than a lot of other places. However, records, certain countries aren't so great. The reality of this is had they promoted a healthy lifestyle, physical activity, diet, and letting this work through our antibody system for those who are healthy, and then having the vaccine for those who were at risk, right? Anybody who was elderly or who had any immunocompromised situation, they should have been isolated, right? And they should have had the vaccine. We kind of did things outside of the way science works, which is usually you quarantine the sick. Instead, we try to quarantine the healthy. And there's a lot of hurt feelings around this still, right? There's a lot of people who think they still need a vaccine every 6 months. And there's a lot of people who don't stop and go, what did we learn from this? What did we learn about human behavior as a group? What did we learn about our government's response to things? What did we learn that was right and wrong? Should the next thing come up? Because there will be another thing at some point. It won't be a plague, most likely, but in the Jewish tradition, plague is the worst evil imaginable. It's literally in the Sefer Yetzirah. The worst is literally plague, because back in any time before modern medicine, plague could wipe out a whole population of people. If your enemy came with a sizable army during a plague, you are most likely decimated. Okay, well, how do we start talking about where we are at today? There's a lot of people throwing around terms that are bigoted. And I'm going to say that this is maybe the secondary plague. This is the result of the knock-on effect of possibly COVID, of people with this toxicity that was unresolved growing within them and not being cleared out. Being anti-people, being anti-love, being anti-good. And we don't like these terms. We like to point at somebody and say, they're the bad guy so I can feel good, right? Extremism. And you know what? I don't think saying the KKK community is a bunch of Satan worshipers is actually extremism. It's proper labeling. But if I were to say this about the president, for example, besides the fact that it wouldn't be true, it would be something wrong, because it doesn't solve for the problem. And what is the problem? The problem is that we have a lot of gray areas that need to be addressed properly. How do we do that with love? How do we go from these hard-hitting topics and then say, well, how do we actually embody love? What does love look like through these things? Love of self is accepting oneself and understanding oneself. How do we love the others, no matter who they are, what they believe? In a nation here, at least in America, where we're allowed to be free in word, body, and soul. We're all created equal, even if later on we choose to behave in ways that lower us. What do we do for love when we see the KKK? We go, these Satan worshipers are making people ill with their behavior, and they're hurting people. And there's actually been some great people who've actually sat down with them and found out a lot of it was issues. It was insecurities. It was ignorances. It was their own demons coming out to say the problem isn't themselves, when it was somebody else based on something that they couldn't control. They were just born. And there's been some wonderful men, and unfortunately the name eludes me. There's a wonderful black man who has transformed a lot of people, a lot of KKK members, away from them, because quite frankly, he was able to sit with them and hear them and go, well, what's going on here? And that man was a saint. I almost want to, I'm going to do this. Hold on. I'm gonna take a second and pull his name up. Give me one moment. Daryl Davis. Daryl Davis. An angel. A real healer of humanity. A saint. A real saint of a human being. Daryl Davis is an example where I want to find more of this. Daryl Davis level energy is in the way we speak to each other post-COVID. Because Daryl Davis, despite seeing the evils of these people, as I've clearly stated, figured out how to change them from that. He figured out how to go and sit down and make them from one thing to another. From nothing to something, so to speak. Abracadabra, he changed them. And for the seething left over, for the ways we treated each other and what we really value after COVID, when really we should have looked at life very differently. And I think many of us do. I think many of us do actually deeply appreciate life now. Like, we look at it and go, it could be snuffed out tomorrow, and it always has been like that. But like, we don't live with that looming over our head like we do in other parts of the world. where there is much more suffering. Places like Africa, sometimes South America. Depending on your government, it could be your government. Think of a place like Eritrea. Maybe even China or Russia, depending on what your political standpoint is. These things are different in this nation. That's what sets us apart. Is we can look at these things in here and we can resolve for them, and we can do something about it. We have Daryl Davis showing us how it's done, showing us how to be the Antichrist. Something that I want to invoke in all of you who are listening. So I want you to take a minute and think about where you could properly label things from an internal world as what they truly are, and then where you could be Daryl Davis with them. Where from your heart you can say, you know what, I'm not being honest about these aspects of somebody. As Daryl Davis looked at those people and said, you know what, that's only one aspect of them. There's other qualities these people. I can relate to them in those areas, and I can grow their heart, and I can return them to the Lord. I can return them to God. I can return them to Shiva and Shakti. I can return them to Jesus. I can return them to the Lord of Lords. That's what he did. And we can all do that with each other. And I guarantee you some of those conversations he had were some of the hardest that any human has ever had. But he didn't shy away from it. He just kept going. That's what I want for those of us on the path, to know that that level of commitment to love is what's being asked. That's why there's yoga, qigong, tai chi. That's why there's ophanim and AYP. That's why there's ritual and reading scripture. That's why there's all these tools, because they help us stay with God while speaking to those parts of the people we love that aren't perfect yet, because we have those ourselves. Those tools change ourselves so that we can help others simply by being ourselves, shine the light. And to go and shine the light, go be the light. You don't need to read from a specific book. Go be the light to somebody. And maybe if they say something that's really out of alignment, label them inside instead of outside appropriately. And then look for it within yourself and change it in yourself and help them find more love and compassion. With that, I'm going to sign off for the day. I hope you enjoyed this short podcast. I hope it's brightened your light today. Maybe it's been a unique ride of a conversation, but if anything, I hope it reminds you that you're loved, you're seen, the world is seen, God is here with you in all things, and that I love you. Bye.